everyone, welcome back to the Avenue podcast, where we're passionate about unleashing your God-given potential through the life-transforming power of the gospel. I'm Josh.
And I'm Ash.
And today we're going to be continuing our stories season where we explore different stories of our members of the Avenue and talk a little bit about their story and what they have to share. And today we're blessed to have Ash join us today.
Thanks for having me.
Where we're gonna talk about a little about your Christian journey, about doubt a little bit as well, which is is a really important part of the Christian faith, and some personal experiences that you've had throughout that journey. So we're really excited to hear what you've got to share with us. But before we sort of get into your questions and your story, tell us a bit about yourself, your background.
The age-old question.
Yeah, the age-old question. Like, what are you doing with yourself? What do you do with your time? What are your hobbies and interests, I guess?
All right, let me give you my elevator pitch.
It's a job interview.
Yep, I'm getting flashbacks to job interviews I've had recently. So my name is Ash, and I've been part of the Avenue community pretty much since its inception, when me and Josh were both in year 11.
I was waiting to see how long you'd take to bring that up.
Me and Josh went to school together, fun fact. So I am still studying a double degree of law and commerce. And I work part-time at a law firm. And in my spare time, I enjoy writing poetry. I feel like I keep throwing that in every podcast I do for Avenue. I'm a bit of a shameless plugger, apparently, but I do love poetry.
Yeah.
And I also love playing the piano and the drums on occasion. So music and poetry are quite a big part of my life.
Yeah.
How about you, Josh? Am I allowed to do that? Interviewee?
What am I doing with myself? It's a bit of a hard question to answer at the moment. Most of you know this year I've sort of been doing a little bit of part-time work, transitioning from uni, which I finished at the end of last year, to sort of full-time work. But at the moment working and qualified as a paramedic and doing a little bit of work in private companies at events and music festivals and concerts and things like that. So if you're
might spot him at a rave.
Yeah, if you're a goer to raves, I'll hopefully won't see you there, because that means something would have happened. But hopefully I'll see you as a bystander and come and say hello. But awesome. It's a bit weird being on camera, isn't it? I gotta be worried about my appearance and how I sit and everything. But no, we'll see how we go. It's a new thing that we're obviously trying. But tell us a little bit about what you're going to be sharing. Any personal experiences that have led you to this point and sharing, and sort of what you want to talk about in general. Yeah.
So I had on my heart to talk about doubt because I think sometimes it is a feeling or an experience that isn't talked about very openly, maybe just in my experience in church, and maybe some people experience it less than others or in different forms, but it's definitely been something that I've experienced different times throughout my work as a Christian, and I think it's helpful knowing that you're not alone when you go through those experiences. I think it can be quite a heavy time. I know periods when I've doubted things about God, about the Bible, about Christianity, have felt quite dark and heavy. And maybe I should add a preface in saying that doubt comes in different forms. There's so many things you can doubt as a Christian. And sometimes, my doubts have been as extreme as not even knowing if God is real, if any of the claims of the Bible or Christianity are real. Or sometimes doubt is something like, is God going to answer this prayer? Does God love me? There's so many different variations of doubt. Sometimes they have left me feeling really quite empty and life feeling meaningless. But I've learned a lot through those seasons. So that was what I wanted to talk about today.
Yeah, awesome. No, I think it's for me personally as well, growing up through church, it was always almost a case of, if you're in the church and if you're a part of a church establishment, then doubt isn't a part of your journey, or it shouldn't be a part of your journey. And that was at least the the conception that I had growing up in church, that doubt just isn't part of your faith journey, because you have this faith and you have this foundation that is God and, you know, the Bible, which is the whole truth, or at least that's what we believe. And it doesn't leave any room for doubt.
Yeah.
But if you look into the Bible, like, that's just not the case at all, right? Like that there's so many people who doubted Jesus even when he was on earth. And yeah, that's the reason I guess I'm so excited to hear what you've got to share, because I think doubt and faith are very closely interlinked and a lot more, sort of tied in together than you think. So, yeah, you mentioned some cases and experiences that you have experienced doubt. Do you mind delving a little bit deeper into those specific, personal encounters that you've had where you may have doubted God and what that looks like?
Yeah. So the very first time I had any doubts about God being real at all was probably when I was in year 11, actually. And interestingly, that was also the year that I would say I actually became a Christian. I grew up going to church every week with my family, but I would describe myself as a very lukewarm Christian, or a Christian that, probably Christian wouldn't even be the right term, because I didn't really think about God on days other than Sundays when I went to church. My life felt very compartmentalized. God was something I thought about during church, and then the rest of my life I was thinking about other things. And then year 11, I really sort of investigated or thought more deeply about God, and thought about my lifestyle and how I could see God actually in every aspect of my life, and how I wanted to change my lifestyle to put God at the center. And that was after I made these sort of series of decisions that I suddenly started questioning, wait, is God even real at all? It suddenly seemed quite fantastical that there would be like this omnipresent power. And it's interesting that at that timing, I think, and not to say that it was necessarily a spiritual warfare or something from the enemy, but I do wonder whether, as I really gave my life to God, the enemy saw me as more of a threat. And that was when this barrage of doubt really came over me. But that the week where I think it really reached its most intense point, that Sunday when I went to church, I remember the sermon being about doubt, and actually really being about the enemy or the devil putting that doubt in our minds. And the pastor really urged us to stand up against doubt, I can't remember the phrase he used, but he really urged the congregation to have that boldness in standing up to these doubts and just telling the devil to step back. And I'd never really heard that preached in church before, and I honestly don't think I've heard it since. And so that really helped me. It wasn't even the message itself. It was the fact that the message was about what I was experiencing that made me feel very seen by God. And that probably helped to reassure me that God was real. And when I look at each moment of doubt, each season of doubt in my life, that wasn't the first and only time. I think what's gotten me out of it is a moment that makes me feel seen by God. So a couple of other memorable moments, maybe 2 years later, I'd read the book Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, which I would really recommend to anyone listening. And it was helpful for me because C.S. Lewis creates quite a compelling argument to show how the fact that each of us have this inbuilt moral code, it's quite strong evidence that there is a God. And he sort of uses logic and almost a scientific reasoning to prove God. And I remember reading that and feeling like, oh, wow, feels like another feather in my bow, or another way to strengthen my faith. And actually, I felt more protected against doubts. But then I read some other articles that really challenged what C.S. Lewis had said, and it was talking about how, no, our morality could evolve by evolution. And I just remember all these thoughts and complex ideas were in my head, and I just started doubting everything again. And I think I realized from that maybe I can't just rely on logic and reasoning. Like, maybe you can, and I probably need to really drill down and read C.S. Lewis again. But I think ultimately when you encounter God, like that is probably the more compelling argument for me than being able to believe purely based on logic and reasoning. And that's not to say that I don't think there's a place for C.S. Lewis's theory about moral law, but I think that maybe we need more. And honestly, what gives more meaning to faith as well, I think, is having a personal relationship with God. But yeah, that season I remember feeling so much doubt. And honestly, I think it was my dad that he shared with me his testimony of when he encountered God. He had quite a physical sensation, like a touch from the Holy Spirit.
Right.
And again, like that really spoke to me. And I felt seen by God as well, working through my dad in sharing that. And that helped. I didn't really reconcile all of the different things I'd been reading. I think I just could rest in knowing that, God had seen me in that place of doubt, and that I needed to focus more on my relationship with God than trying to prove things just based on apologetics. Sorry, I feel like this is turning into a bit of a monologue.
No,
but
keep going.
another maybe faith crisis, if you will, that I had, and that was actually probably earlier this year, was when I was first properly introduced to the concept of predestination, which I'm not going to go into that either, because I know that's
a whole series, that one.
That is, yes, we won't open that can of worms.
Yeah.
But for those who are not familiar with the concept, it's kind of like there's a camp that believe in it and a camp that don't, and it sort of comes to the question of why isn't everyone saved by God. And anyway, this opened a whole lot of questions and doubts for me again, and I suddenly was questioning God's character. And then again, it felt like, wait, is God even real if I can't reconcile these questions and all of this? But again, I think, what even happened? Now I can't pinpoint what it was, but I was able again to feel God's presence, just to know that I was seen by him, and that helped me again come out of it. And maybe a theme throughout this is sometimes our intellect maybe gets in the way. And that's not to say that God can't be, you can't reconcile God and intellect, because you absolutely can. I think God and science and God and intellect and God and philosophy, it's all consistent. But sometimes maybe it's a bit beyond me or beyond us as humans. And sometimes we need to go back to basics. Remember that it's ultimately about that relationship. And if we focus on building that relationship again, the other things don't seem as important and seem as all-consuming. And I've definitely had to leave some questions unanswered when I've gone through these periods of doubt. And so maybe some advice to my younger self would be, don't be scared about leaving questions unanswered.
Yeah.
I think I'm someone that likes to have everything answered, that doesn't love having those spaces of grey. But maybe that's a bit hypocritical of me as a poet, because, we love the grey poets. So I think I've learnt to embrace the grey more. Even Pathways, I think, has been helpful for me, because for those who aren't familiar with the model of our church, we have these Bible studies that are sort of at the centre of our church. And instead of just sitting and listening to a pastor, we wrestle over text. And often, I'm sure it's the same in your group, questions are left unanswered.
Yeah, definitely.
People have different opinions.
Yeah.
But that's okay. So I think that would be some advice to my younger self.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for sharing that. It's interesting to hear, I guess, through the snippet of like experiences that you shared. And I'm curious to sort of get your take on this, but do you think there's a correlation between doubt and faith, and where does that correlation sort of lie? Because I think you mentioned that, I was going to ask you, is doubt something that you still experience today? And I think you answered that by saying that, yeah, you still experience doubt even, at the beginning of this year, or maybe if they're not major sort of, I guess, faith crisis moments. But I trust that, doubt is probably still something that you experience every single day. How do you see that as an opportunity for God to actually speak into you? And it's, because you mentioned that during those seasons and during those moments of doubt is often where you get breakthrough moments from God.
Yeah.
Like where do you see that correlation? And do you think therefore moving forwards that doubt is actually not necessarily even a bad thing, but actually a necessary thing in order for us to experience God?
Yeah, I love that question, Josh. After each season of doubt I've experienced, coming out of that, I definitely have experienced like a little personal revival, if you will. It's definitely deepened my faith. And I think maybe it's because I'm so desperately seeking answers, desperately seeking God to show up in those moments. As I mentioned earlier, like in those moments of doubting whether God is real, I sometimes feel like I've lost so much of my identity, so much of everything to me that life can feel quite meaningless and I feel a bit hopeless. And so I'm quite desperately seeking God. And often when we seek, well, I think always when we seek, the Bible says that God will reveal himself to us. And so I definitely have then had an encounter with God that has led to a deeper relationship for that time. So I think that maybe it's that seeking that often comes with doubt for me that has strengthened my faith. But also there's a lot to be said for the value of wrestling over questions. And I often have found answers. Like when I really scrutinize predestination, even though I still actually am not really quite sure where I sit on it, I definitely learnt more about the character of God and learnt more about the Bible. And so I feel better equipped as a Christian to answer questions. So I definitely think there's a lot of good that has come out of every time, and that my faith has been strengthened. And even if sometimes it feels like I'm going around in circles on the surface, I'm back to the square one of thinking, wait, is God real? I like to think of this picture that a pastor once shared of, if you imagine a helix. Oh, this is actually helpful about being on camera.
Yeah, you can demonstrate
use
it.
my hands. Yeah, I love that. But for those who are listening, I think there's still going to be the Spotify format. Imagine like a helix, like a spiral staircase, how it goes down. And when you look at that from like a bird's eye view, maybe you just see a circle, right? But if you look at it from a different angle, it's getting deeper. And so I'm really not expressing this as well as the pastor did, but you know, maybe from one angle, it looks like you're going around in circles, but from another angle, you're getting deeper. And so I do feel like even though the doubt might be the same, each time I do go deeper in my faith, I get new things out of it. And so I would encourage anyone who's maybe in a season of doubt and it's like, you know, questioning themselves, like, why am I back in this place again? I thought I had overcome these doubts. You know, there's something new to come out of this season that it's not just going around in circles. It's getting deeper.
Yeah. And I think even to add on to that point as well, I think there is a correlation between knowledge and also doubt. I think often, you know, the Bible talks about and Jesus talks about childlike faith. And if you think about a child or a young toddler who maybe has this image of love or maybe has this image of peace or even faith in God, if they, you know, are able to wrap their heads around that at such a young age, that image of love isn't burdened by anything and isn't tainted by anything. But as you go through life, as you have experiences, as you meet people, as you go through maybe heartbreak or seasons of doubt or seasons of trial and difficulty, that picture becomes tainted and that picture becomes almost muddied in a way. And all of a sudden your childlike faith is not so much childlike anymore. It becomes this murkier version of faith that has questions and has doubts and has concerns about, you know, things that you may have, almost just, I guess, like blindly believed in the past. And I guess that's the beauty of childlike faith. And I think often in my journey as well, I'm sure it'll be the same for you, that the more knowledge the more your knowledge increases, the more questions come up, but also the more questions become unanswered. And I think even, you know, and this is true from even, you know, the medical industry as well, something that I'm familiar with. And there's been studies that have been conducted that often doctors that have been in the field for longer and been in the industry longer actually struggle to treat, you know, simpler conditions that have less risk associated with them, because they have so much knowledge and because they have so much prior exposure and experience, and maybe even trauma to maybe the 1 in a million case or the 1 in a billion case that went wrong for them. And because of that, they come in with all these preconceived, biases and I guess bad memories of the past. So I think it's almost a case of faith where the more your faith grows and the more your knowledge of God grows, the more doubt that's going to often come up.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it also probably means that you're more equipped to deal with that doubt and more equipped to be okay that there are questions that you don't know.
Absolutely. I love that medical analogy. I think that's really true. So we should prepare ourselves, I guess, as we get deeper in our faith journey for there to be more questions that come up. But there is also that hope, as you say, that we are better equipped to deal with the doubt. It probably catches us less off guard. I do probably feel like my faith crisis earlier this year was less jarring to me because I knew I'd been in this place of doubt before and had gotten through, that I felt like I would get through again. But I don't know what's in the future.
Yeah.
And you're right that particular experiences as well can, maybe it's an event, a really traumatic event that might happen to us. Like, can definitely be a time of when faith is tested.
Yeah, for sure.
Did you have any specific experiences that you wanted to share? I feel weird just talking about myself, but I guess that's the nature of an interview.
Oh, you're putting me on the spot here. Experiences of doubt. Yeah, I think like you, doubt is something that I experience often daily, particularly through maybe times when I've gone through difficult seasons of things like practically actually happening in my life that have challenged me. And I can't think of any sort of specific examples off the top of my head, but I think certainly through high school, which again you'd be familiar with.
Did we say we went to the same high school already?
I was saying to someone before that when I introduce you to people, I never say like Ashleigh, my friend from school, because I see you so much now, and I see you more now actually than probably in school. So it's a bit of a weird one, but
we forget sometimes. Yeah.
But I think throughout school, obviously going to a non-Christian school was maybe it was difficult for my faith, but also probably helped it grow in a lot of ways. And there were often times where, I felt alone and I felt isolated in that mindset and the headspace that I was in. And particularly when my beliefs were exposed in, differences in my lifestyle compared to, friends of mine who had maybe a different lifestyle that they lived. And, or maybe when my friends or, the community in general, maybe, did things that were against what I thought was my moral code or my spiritual moral code. And I think in those moments, it really tested me to A, see how I actually responded to that, but B, see how I was able to reconcile like the other side of the argument, I guess. So, those are some, I guess, moments off the top of my head that I can sort of think of that, I guess, push my faith, but also looking back with the beauty of hindsight, I think those experiences were very important in shaping my faith to where it is now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a really good aspect of doubt, I think, that you've touched on. Doubts around how to live our lives. I think I've definitely experienced them too. Like sometimes you look at what the Bible tells us to do in terms of behaviors and you wonder, actually, is this best for me?
Exactly.
Do I know better?
Yeah,
and
sure.
Again, I think sometimes we might need to leave questions unanswered or just trust that God knows better than us. And that maybe we won't know the why behind certain behaviors until we get to heaven. And it really does call for us to surrender.
Yeah.
Some teachings, I think, everyone, no matter what their religion or lack of religion, they would agree that, oh yes, it's best that we don't murder. That's objectively good. Yeah. But some things, it's hard to reconcile them against other just like objective moral codes. So that definitely does lead to doubt. And I think we see that also in the church, how there can be disagreements as well. And I think we as Christians probably need to be more comfortable with different opinions and uncertainty.
Yeah, speaking of unanswered questions, you mentioned before that you write poetry, and we'll for those of you that don't know Ashleigh's poetry account, Seller Poetry on Instagram, we'll make sure we link it in the description below.
Thanks,
but
Josh.
I think it's been sort of a little bit publicized within our community about how you write poetry, and I know that it's very interesting reading that from my perspective, and
Thanks.
seeing like your thoughts expressed that I'm like, hey, I actually have that thought as well, but it wasn't experienced in that way. How do you, because you mentioned before that poetry is often very vague, and often very open-ended and open to interpretation from the person who's reading it. And that is perhaps the beauty of poetry as well. How have you seen that as a way or an outlet for you to tackle your doubts and for you to tackle those unanswered questions?
I think there's something to be said about writing things down, putting things in words that can be really cathartic.
Yeah.
Sometimes thoughts can be so muddied in our head, and it really helps to get clarity. I think writing down exactly what my doubt is, and maybe it also takes some of the power out of the doubts when I see them written down in front of me. But I think what you've said about how you can relate also is really helpful to me, because I do get people telling me that they relate to my poems, and feeling less alone is such a powerful thing. It makes you feel like, okay, this is normal. It's not something to be. Yeah. So that also motivates me a lot to write poetry, because I want other people to feel less alone. And also I get a lot from reading other people's poetry and seeing the same themes. And I also sometimes I think maybe I often feel quite grateful for the poems that I've written, because sometimes I feel like they really are given to me by God. Like, as a little tangential testimony, I have written poetry for a long time. I wrote my first poem when I was 5.
Oh, wow.
Don't ask to read it,
Okay.
though. I read it now. That's definitely many ways to interpret that one.
Very different childhoods growing up.
Yep.
Can't say I was writing poetry at 5.
Look, I definitely wasn't a prodigy. If you read that poem, you would agree. But I would write like a couple of poems a year, not much of an output. But when I started sharing my poetry online, suddenly I just got this like flood of poems coming to me. And definitely it felt like a gift from God, sort of being like, okay, you're using this interest or this gift to worship me. Or, I mean, I don't know, my poems sometimes talk about doubts as well, but my heart behind them is to lead other people to God, or to get them to think deeper. And so it sort of felt like God saw me trying to honor him through my poetry, and then gave me more words. And so I do feel words come to me in seasons of doubt, and it feels like a little nod from God. It feels like him sort of saying, I'm still here, I'm still giving you this. And so that in itself, I think, helps me tackle those doubts. So poetry has definitely been very, a manifestation of God's grace and mercy during my seasons of doubt.
Yeah. And I know, speaking from myself as well, like you mentioned before, poetry and also music is a gift of yours as well. And thanks. I guess before knowing you and also Matt as well, through the way that he expresses worship through such creative forms, like I never experienced worship or even God at all through more abstract or maybe more open-ended styles of worship before. And that's just not how I'm minded at all. Like, don't ask me to write poetry, don't ask me to make music or anything. Like, no one wants to hear that. But it was amazing.
I would love to hear that. I would pay to hear that.
No one wants to hear that. No one wants to hear that. But it was amazing, even from someone who is wired so differently to that, to actually read those poems and be like, wow, like this puts a lot of words to thoughts that I previously couldn't. And to even it's like, I'll often say to you, oh Ash, this is a really good poem, like this is what I got out of it. And like we'll often have conversations and realize that what I took out of it is completely different from what you wrote it to be, or what even you may have taken out of it. And I think that's the beauty of such creative forms of worship and glorifying God, is that it often speaks to people in such different ways in the season that they're in, and in a context that they understand as well. And I guess that's where the open-ended nature of poetry and even music can aid things like that. But sort of as a closing point, if you had to if you had to give us any words of advice about practical tips on how to deal with doubt, maybe not even the big questions of doubt, but maybe just everyday doubts that Christians or, even non-Christians sort of have, from, anything from existence to just, is God real or anything like that? Like, what would you share to those people who are struggling with doubt?
I think sometimes it does depend on what the doubt is.
Yeah.
But probably a strategy that can apply to any doubt is don't let your doubt push you away. And I know that might seem counterintuitive, because when you're in a space of questioning God, it might make you want to turn away from him. But if you can press closer to him and seek him, I think there you will have your doubts, or at least that relationship strengthening will make those doubts less powerful. It might not be that every doubt is resolved and tied up in a neat little bow, but if you turn to God and press deeper, I think there's consolation and peace. And that's what I've experienced. And so I would say, as maybe a practical tip, try to read the Bible more, even if maybe you feel less motivated than ever. There's been times where I've opened the Bible in a series in a place of doubt, and then there's been something that has spoken to me so powerfully that both did it solidify. For example, a specific example, I remember another period of being like, wait, is Jesus really God? Like, this is a radical claim. And then opening to like a prophecy in Micah that talks about how the Savior was going to be born in Bethlehem, which is what happened. And that's pretty cool to see that prophecy hundreds of years beforehand. Seeing prophecies fulfilled in the Bible has definitely been something that strengthened my faith.
Yeah.
And so opening up to that and reading that in that moment, and I'd never read that before, that felt both reassuring, but also I felt like God could see me and knew I needed to read something like that. So I would encourage people to turn to their Bible, pray and ask God to take away the doubts, as I really have prayed a lot of those prayers. Talk to other people. I know I spoke to my dad in one of those seasons, and he shared his personal encounter, which encouraged me a lot. And even just speaking to other people who might be like, yes, I've been there, I got through, or maybe they need to be able to relate to you. So that's, they're probably my main strategies. There's probably not a easy answer other than to ask God for help and seek him. Josh, do you have any tips to add?
Yeah, I think just trying to reshape your mindset around doubt if doubt is something that you're tackling with. I think, like I mentioned at the beginning, doubt is seen as this like a no-go zone when you're a Christian. Like when you're a Christian, or when you accept Jesus, like don't even mention when you get baptized. Like you can't have any doubt. Like you have to be 100%, stone cold, like set on who God is. But that's just not the case, because if that was the case, then that doesn't align with our belief of God offering free will as well. That, I've always said that without doubt, we're just puppets. Like without doubt, without our own opinions or our own questions, like there is no free will. And I think often when you face doubt, particularly when it comes to God and those big existential, like maybe crises that you're going through, it often seems like God is this immovable object here, and we're trying to like answer questions or get over hurdles to pass the exam almost to get to God, and that God is far away from us, or that he's even running away from us when we are trying to chase him with those doubts. But I think if you look at the way that Jesus handles particularly someone like Thomas, who was a disciple, and he was known as like Thomas the doubter, or the person who doubted, and it's like such a terrible legacy to have, I guess. But I think it's like also a really important legacy to have, because if you look at the way that Jesus responded to Thomas's doubt, he didn't push Thomas away. He didn't tell Thomas to even go away and think about it by himself, and then when he was more certain, like, come back to me. Jesus actually invited those doubts. He actually invited those questions, and he actually invited Thomas to go away and think about it, and to like speak to other people about it, to speak to him about it. So I think it's all about shifting your mindset around God isn't over here while you're over here tackling your doubt. Like God is with you in that doubt.
Yeah.
And he not only invites those questions, but he wants to help you answer them.
Yeah.
He wants to, he wants to show you particularly parts of his character that maybe you are trying to find out, or parts of his personality, parts of his miracles that you perhaps don't know yet. And that's maybe why you're facing the doubt. And so I think it's just about not seeing doubt as so much of a negative thing, about that you're missing the mark, or you're not good enough, or you're, there's something wrong with the way that you are seeing God, but just realizing that, God is inviting those doubts. And not only does he invite them, he welcomes them, and he acknowledges that without doubt, we are not the human beings that he created to love. Like, he created human beings to have a mind of their own. And that's, I guess, the beauty of the God that we believe in, is that he invites doubt and understands why we have them as well. So, for me, I think that was a shift that I have tried to, shift my mindset into. And I think it's really, it's really rewarding to see the way that I tackle doubt, as opposed to maybe how I would probably tackle it before I knew that, in trying to hit the mark, or trying to just gain as much knowledge and information as I could, and like store it up for an exam or something. So
there is a lot of beauty, I think, in the fact that some faith is needed, that we need to trust God, trust in sometimes things that might seem unlikely. Like if there was no need for faith, then I think we would just be puppets, right?
Yeah.
Like if God was just obvious, and we could just have all the answers now, and we could just get whatever we wanted now, like we wouldn't have this experience. I think there is that aspect of God giving us the freedom to choose, the freedom to find him ourselves. So there is some beauty in faith, even though it comes with hard times as well.
Yeah, I'll finish with this analogy that I heard once. It's like you're getting into a relationship with someone, right? Like, if you think back about when you and Matt first became acquainted and started, being friends and then progressing to dating and going out. Like, imagine if you had rocked up on your first date with Matt, and he just handed you this booklet or this manual. It was like so thick, and you were like, what is this? And Matt was like, this is everything about me. This is all the experiences that I've had. This is all the aspects of my personality, how you can expect me to respond in every single case, how to troubleshoot when I'm feeling upset or when I'm feeling sad, what I need in those times. Like, here it is. This is for your knowledge. Yeah. And then just left it at that. Like, that would be the weirdest thing ever. Like, that would be so odd. Like, you'd be like, what the heck is this? Like, I think the beauty of relationship, maybe not even romantic, like maybe in friendship, is that you discover things about the other person, and that if there is love behind it, which drives you to actually know more about them, like that, like I think God created himself, or God is there for us to discover more about him, depending on how much we want to know. And he's always wanting to answer questions and wanting to show off more of himself and more of his personality and character to you. He doesn't just give us this manual about like, this is everything that I am into words, and we just read this and we're like, oh, cool, okay. It's like learning how to use a machine or something. So I think it's about actually taking the time to almost enjoy the doubt, like almost enjoy that wrestling process, because like you said, it's often through the wrestling that you feel closer to God and you feel more in tune with him. So rather than seeing doubt as something that you're tackling to reach God, think of doubt as something that you're tackling with God. Like, God's like almost like tutoring you in that sense. Like, he's in a one-on-one space, and he's like, what about this? What about that? Like, he's trying to give you answers and everything. He's trying to help you out. So,
no, I love that analogy. And it did make me think that, doubt isn't also something we just have about God. Like, we have doubts about our friends.
Yeah,
like,
exactly, for sure.
Like, faith is needed. Like, you need to have faith in your friends as well. Like, faith is not just something that is needed as a Christian. Like, it pops up in every aspect of our life. So it's a good muscle to strengthen.
Yeah. Well, thanks very much for taking the time to share these experiences with us.
Thanks for listening.
I know that personally, like, I took a lot out of that, and I'm sure you guys did listening at home as well. But yeah, I think that brings us to the end of our podcast. Tune in next week as we'll continue to unpack people's stories, their experiences and their testimonies about their experiences through life as well. And hopefully you'll be able to gain some things out of that. But until then, we hope that this podcast brought some insight and some laughter as well for your day. But yeah, we'll see you next week.
Thanks, Josh. Thanks, everyone.